My name is George Harrison, and what I am about to tell you may be alarming to some of you. When I was little, my mother took me to kindergarten. I looked at her and didn't understand what was happening. She was talking to another woman who had a little girl standing next to her. I was told to look after this girl in kindergarten. I nodded to my mother and the girl's mother. We were like a pair of magnets all day, and her name was Mary. I didn't know at the time that Mary lived 10 houses away from my house. Over time, our mothers took turns taking us to school. Our mothers became best friends, and our fathers too. I was too young to understand the meaning of love at first sight. We played together after school and on weekends, and were never far from each other growing up. From kindergarten to elementary school, we were always together. After primary school, Mary went to a girls' school, and I went to a boys' school. In the mornings, we went to school together. Tom Jenkins started bullying me when I was 12. He was bigger than me. Mary shouldn't have known about this. We both finished school. I went to auto mechanic college, and Mary wanted to become an accountant. When I was in my first year, I absorbed all the technology of engineering in seconds. It was second nature to me. When I was at home and did not see Mary, I read one engineering book after another. In college, when asked a question, I always knew the answer 3 years in advance. I passed the first exam and came first. I was always several years ahead of my classmates. I was so good at mechanical and electrical things that I started studying jet engines. My father and mother had to take me away from my books, and we went hunting and fishing on weekends in the summer. Mary and her parents came too, and we lived in a 6-person log cabin. My father was a good shot, and when I was 18, he gave me his rifle with a scope. He bought himself a new powerful rifle. The scope on my father's rifle was aimed at me. I reconfigured it as it grew. I joined the Territorial Army. This turned out to be a mistake for me. By the age of 20, my father gave me his new high-powered rifle for my 21st birthday. Mary and I qualified and were in love. The only outcome was to get married, and we did it at 21 and a half years old. We went on a 2-week honeymoon. When we returned to our 4-bedroom house, all our wedding clothes were there. Mother Mary put them there. Mary's wedding dress, veil, shoes, underwear, something borrowed, and something blue. Next to Mary's clothes was my 3-piece suit, shirt, tie, shoes, and socks. We looked at our old vanity from her great-aunt. Mary's dried flowers lay next to him, and next to me was my boutonniere flower. A stack of wedding cards, telegrams, and all the seats at the tables. And lastly, the bride and groom figurines from our wedding cake with our names. My Mary ran to the phone to thank her mother for everything she had done. Mary opened the deepest suitcase from her honeymoon and dumped everything on the floor. The first thing she put in was my wedding clothes, then Mary's clothes, then postcards and 2 figures. She packed the dried flowers into paper bags. They were the last ones. The whole time she was packing her clothes, tears flowed down her face. As she closed the suitcase, she turned to me and said that when we are old and gray, we will look at them and remember our wonderful day. All I could do was hug her tightly and kiss her with all my heart. 12 months later, I became the proud father of 2 twin boys. My Mary had problems after they were born and could no longer have children. It tore us apart, but life had to go on. I always wanted to join the army. My father tried to talk me out of it, and so did Mary's father. But my decision was final. I joined the army. My Territorial Army personnel file went with me, and I completed my basic training. Because of my engineering skills, I was going to be transferred to the engineering department. Besides, they knew that I was an excellent shooter. I was given a sniper rifle. Then the unpredictable happened. The war began. We were given an order. I returned home for 24 hours to see Mary and the 2 boys before leaving. We made love as soon as the boys fell asleep. Holding my Mary tightly, I kissed the boys and then my beautiful Mary. Tears flowing from her eyes, she screamed, "Please be safe." I turned and looked at her, saying, "I will." My transfer papers never arrived. Someone didn't write them, so I went to war. It was a matter of kill or be killed. The war was terrible. What I saw haunted me for the rest of my life. But this had to be excluded from my consciousness. Time passed, I sent letters home and received my letters. The photos of Mary and my boys were close to my heart. We were at a camp and there was a makeshift shower. We took turns taking showers. Then it was my turn. I undressed and took off my identification tags. Then a barrage of fire with half a dozen explosions fell on us. I woke up in the hospital a few days later. The army nurse called the army doctor and he examined me. All I had was a wild headache. "Soldier, what is your name?" he asked me. I opened my mouth to say my name, rank, and number. It didn't work out. He asked again. "It's written on my tags," I said. I wanted to get my tokens, but they weren't there. "Don't worry, soldier. It will come back to you soon. You got hit on the head and lost your memory for a while," he said. A few days later, I was back on my feet. The only personal item I had was my wedding ring. I was married, but to whom? I asked about my comrades. I was told that they were all dead, scattered everywhere. I was the only one found alive. I was the lucky one. Session after session, they tried everything to get my memory back. But she didn't return. The top of my bunk said unknown. They had to give me a name, and I picked it from a magazine. That's how I became Jim Taylor. While I was in the Army hospital, I fixed all the broken beds. They knew I had mechanical and electrical skills. From time to time, I raised my hands, holding the rifle. They are not attached to this meaning. Finally, I was sent home, back to the country, with a new name, Jim Taylor, and a wedding ring. The Army took care of me, and I went back to work fixing cars. I visited every Army camp in the country on weekends. To discover your true identity, I go into pubs hoping that someone will recognize me. The weeks dragged on, turning into months, then years. Even though I called myself Jim Taylor, to me I was still Mr. Duas unknown. I was married, and where was my wife? You may know that I looked at my ring and cried every time. Years passed, and I was lying under the truck fixing the drive shaft. I let go, and he hit me in the head, knocking me down. I woke up in a local hospital. I knew this was not an Army hospital. It was already late, and night was quickly coming. The nurse told me to lie still and went to get the doctor. He came and examined me. He said to me, "How are you feeling, Mr. Taylor?" I shook my head, saying, "My name is George Harrison, not Taylor, and what's wrong with me, doctor?" "Mr. Taylor, you were injured while working on a truck. The drive shaft hit you," he said. "Yes, I remember being under a truck. But my name is George Harrison, not Taylor. I should call my wife, she will be worried," I said. "Mr. Taylor, I need to run some tests. You seem to have lost your memory and think you are Mr. George Harrison," said the doctor. "Doctor, my name is really George Harrison, and I'm in the Army," I said. He looked at me, clearly worried. He then took something from the medical box. "Doctor, my real name is George Harrison. I can prove it." He sensed the panic in my voice, and he was ready to give me an injection to calm me down. "Doctor, my wife's name is Mary, and her telephone number. The telephone number of my mother and father. The telephone number of Mary's parents. Wait a minute, where's my wallet?" They gave me my coat, and I took out my wallet and letter. I handed the letter to the doctor, saying, "Please read this. This is a letter from the Army." The doctor stopped and read the letter. He then told the nurse to call the head of administration and ask him to return to the hospital immediately. "Sir, I'm going to give you an injection, and while you rest, we'll call your wife," the doctor said. The doctor didn't call me George Harrison or Jim Taylor. Now I was just Sir. There was clearly something important in the letter. I fell asleep within 15 minutes. The next morning, when I woke up, the room was full of people. A new nightmare in my life was on its way. The hospital doctor examined me. Then an Army doctor and a high-ranking officer came in. They examined me. Then they made a circle. All I wanted was to get out of bed, eat, and go home to my Mary. The Army doctor asked everyone to leave the room except the hospital doctor. The Army doctor took out the file, and the high-ranking officer remained standing. The high-ranking officer began asking me many questions. the date I joined the military, where I did basic training, etc. Then my name, rank, and service number. All evidence has confirmed that I am Mr. George Harrison, and my next of kin is my Mary. I didn't notice that the hospital doctor had his hand behind his back. Mr. George Harrison, I have to give you an injection. It's due to a blow to the head, the doctor said. The needle went in, and the high-ranking officer began to explain everything. There was something relaxing about the injection. Mr. George Harrison, please listen to me and try to understand what I am about to tell you. I see your transfer papers never arrived, because someone didn't write them. You shouldn't have been in combat 7 years ago. In battle, you were hit on the head and lost your memory. We always suspected that someday your memory would return. Therefore, we have asked you to carry this letter with detailed information with you at all times. Mr. Harrison, you came under heavy fire, and you were the only survivor. You were naked, and no clothes were found. The medics took you to an army hospital, and when you woke up, you had lost your memory. We informed all the families of the soldiers about their deaths in battle, but the records showed that you were a member of the group. No one was able to find your body. Due to the intense fighting, it was assumed that you took a direct hit, as did the other 3. We, the Army, should have informed your loved ones. A telegram was sent to your wife to inform you that you were missing in action and presumed killed in action. I screamed at the top of my voice. No, 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 not my beloved wife, who thinks I'm dead. This is not true. I want to see her. Where is she? I screamed and screamed. The injection helped, but my thoughts were only about my Mary. I wanted to get up and find my wife and fix everything. The army doctor left the room and returned with my father. Dad, is Mary with you? I shouted to him. My father looked sad. I had never seen him like that. All he did was hug me tightly. No, son, but your mother is here, and she wants to talk to you first. Dad, whatever you say to me, I want Mom to hear it too. Is Mary with her? My father asked my mother to come in, and my mother hugged me like she did when I was a little boy. Her love screamed for me, and she began to cry. Mom, don't cry. I'm alive. Where is my Mary? Mom sat on one side of the bed, and Dad on the other, both holding my hands. The hospital doctor told Mom and Dad that he gave me a shot to keep me calm. He then said, "We'll be outside if you need us." My father began to speak. Another nightmare was on its way. This is what he told me. Mary no longer lives in the house where you lived. She moved to the other side of the city. We see your boys every other week, and they are your spitting image. They're great guys. Mary moved in with her parents shortly after receiving the telegram, saying that you went missing and died in battle. She prayed for 7 empty years that the army was wrong. This, son, will break your heart. Mary remarried a month ago. The boys needed a father. She had money problems. Mary had to sell her 4-bedroom house and move into rented accommodation. We did everything we could, but the boys needed their father. I stared at my father, then at my mother. She nodded and began to cry. My head fell into my hands and I cried. I shouted to the army doctor and the high-ranking officer to come back into the room. They stood at the foot of the bed, looking at me. I said, "The army ruined my life, first. The man who didn't write the transfer papers. His officer should have noticed this right away. It was a mistake by the army. I went into battle. The army received its reward. I killed 20 people. I lost 7 years of my life. You should have taken photos of us before we left. This would help the army accurately identify me. The most important people in my life are my wife and my 2 boys, and both of our parents. Mary thinks I'm dead. What about my sons? They think I am dead. But I am here and my life is into pieces because of the army's mistakes. Fuck the army." An army doctor and a high-ranking officer could not protect the army, and they knew it. They left, leaving me to deal with the problem. My life was now in tatters, but I wanted to see my Mary and explain to her what had happened. A new nightmare was beginning, and I didn't know how it would end. My father and mother stayed, and we talked about the years that had come before, but always came back to my Mary and my 2 boys. At the end of the day, the hospital doctor wanted to make sure I was okay before I could go home to my parents. When my parents left, I cried myself to sleep. I stayed in the hospital until 5 p.m. the next day, and my father took me home. Life was hell. All I wanted was to see my Mary. But my parents didn't know the address, so I had to go to Mary's parents' house to find out. Another nightmare was on its way. The three of us sat in silence most of the night. When I spoke, my parents responded, trying not to upset me. I understood why. The next day, the three of us went to see Mary's parents. They moved. My mother and father knocked on the door while I was sitting in the car. Mom and Dad went inside, and I waited. Then Mary's mother screamed. She just found out that I was alive and sitting in the car. She left the house, crying with joy that I was alive and well. Mary's father was behind her. All they wanted to do was hug me to death. The five of us sat down, and they wanted to know what went wrong. All I wanted was to know where Mary lived. I said, I want to see Mary and talk to her right away. And yes, my parents told me that she got married again a month ago. They felt uncomfortable all the time, but I asked this again and again to find out Mary's address. They said to me, can you meet Mary in this house first before you see the boys and meet her husband? Yes, can we see her tonight at 6 o'clock, please? I said as politely as possible. Her parents arranged this, but did not tell Mary why they wanted her to come to the house that evening. I paced back and forth nervously all day, wondering what to say to Mary. You think war is hell, but no one knows what I go through every second in my hell. The time was drawing near. I washed, shaved, and put on my best clothes. I arrived at Mary's parents' house before 6 and sat in the kitchen holding a beer. I heard a car drive up and the door slam. The memory of Mary's walk returned in an instant. Mother Mary opened the door. Mom, what does this all mean? Why do you want me to come tonight? Said Mary. Mary's voice was pure music to my ears, and a lump stuck in my throat. Mary sat down on the sofa so that I could sit next to her, facing the kitchen door. Mary's father said to her, would you like something strong to drink? No, Dad, what happened? Are you sick? Mary said with concern in her voice. Her father said, no, but Mary, prepare for the shock of your life. Well, Dad, it can't be that bad. What is it? Mary said to her father. This was my signal to enter. I opened the door and Mary let out the loudest scream she could possibly make and fainted. I ran to my Mary, and so did her parents. We all looked at each other, trying to figure out what was going on in Mary's head. Finally, she woke up. She looked at her parents with a stunned expression. Then my Mary turned to me, her eyes widened and her mouth too. Daddy, give me something strong to drink right now, Mary said to her father. My Mary's eyes were now fixed on me. None of us knew what to say. I said, how beautiful you are. Mary burst into tears. I knew her too well. I sat next to her and took her hand. I wanted to kiss my beautiful wife. She put her arms around my neck and held me. I hugged her as tightly as I could. We stepped back and looked at each other as if we were seeing each other for the first time. Then my Mary told me her first word, George. My wife saying my name for the first time in 7 years brought me to tears. Mary followed me and we cried together. My tears were from pure joy. But Mary remarried, and now the next terrible stage in my life and in the life of my Mary began, and we didn't know where it would take us. I talked to her for hours, telling Mary everything. Then the phone rang. It was Mary's husband, asking when she would be coming home to him and the boys. Mary's nightmare was before her in all its glory. Now she is married again to a new husband and still married to me. What a mess. Mary told her new husband that she would call back in a few minutes. She looked at me, then at her parents, her mind spinning. I knew that my parents told me that she still loved me and always would. Mary couldn't go back to her new husband. She knew the pain would kill me. She collapsed on the sofa and cried, saying what I should do now over and over again. Her father spoke, saying, Mary, you can't go back to Tom and the boys. You must leave him tonight. You stay here from now on. I'll go get the boys. call Tom back and tell him I'm coming for the boys." Mary did what her sensible father said. She called Tom, her new husband. She hung up and burst into tears. "George, what do I do? We need to get out of this mess." "Mary, I have to leave. I don't want to, but I have to leave. If I see the boys, the nightmare will be twice as bad. I'll find a lawyer tomorrow to sort out this horrible mess." I hugged my Mary and kissed her for the first time in 7 years. We didn't want to let each other go. I asked her to take time off from work, and I will be back tomorrow while the boys are at school. If only I could see my boys with my Mary. I would have dragged them to the ends of the earth, but this mess had to be solved, so I left. Mary's father went to pick up the boys. I asked everywhere. I needed the best lawyer to solve this case. I was told that Mr. John Roberts is the best. I arrived at his office at 9:30, asking for a meeting. I was lucky he had free time in an hour. I sat down and waited. "Mr. Harrison, Mr. John Roberts can see you now," I was told. "Mr. Harrison, come and sit down. How may I help you?" said Mr. John Roberts. I sat down and told him everything that had happened over the past 7 years, about memory loss and how it came back. And finally, Mary got married a month ago. He listened and wrote down notes. He then called 2 of his employees. He briefly explained to each of them. He then said, "Mr. Harrison, you must not allow your wife to see or talk to her new husband, even just to ask what time it is. You have to let me handle this from now on. Is there a place where your wife can live with boys?" "She has a great aunt 10 miles away," I said. "Then go and negotiate this. By the way, what is your wife's full name after your new marriage?" he asked. I looked at him. "Sorry, I don't know her new last name, but his name is Tom," I replied. "Mr. Harrison, bring your wife to this office today at 2 o'clock, he told me. I left the office, my mind in turmoil. Tom, Tom, Tom. I hope mine Mary I didn't marry the same Tom Jenkins who bullied me at school from the age of 12. Damn, what should I do? He's bigger than me. How will I tell my Mary about this? I left in a kind of fog, with this name Tom haunting me. I went to Mary's parents' house and told her what the lawyer had told me. Her father said, "Mary, we are going to Tom's house, and you are packing things for you and the boys. Mom, you can go and help." I stayed waiting for them to return with their things. When they returned, they spoke to Aunt Mary, and she agreed that Mary and the boys could live with her as long as necessary. It was getting late and I needed to be at Mr. John Roberts' office by 2 o'clock. We arrived a few minutes before the appointed time. "Come on in, Mr. Harrison, and your lady, sit down. Would you like something to drink?" he said. We shook heads. "Mrs. Harrison, excuse me, can you tell me your new last name after your marriage?" he asked Mary. "Mary Jenkins and I are married to Tom Jenkins," Mary answered, hanging her head in shame. "Mrs. Harrison, can I just call you Mary?" he asked. "You're welcome," Mary replied. "Mary, I have a lot of awkward questions to ask you that you may not want to answer in front of Mr. Harrison." "Mr. Harrison, I'd like to talk to Mary in private, if you don't mind," he said. I got up and left the room. During the conversation, Mr. Roberts asked Mary if she loved me and if she wanted to come back to me. She answered, yes. He asked why she married Tom Jenkins. She replied that she was having financial difficulties and he was kind to the boys. "Does Tom Jenkins know that she still loves George and always will?" She answered, yes. Mary told him that he was a kind and good man. He asked if she had an intimate relationship with Tom Jenkins. No. He asked why not, since they had been married for a month. Mary replied that on the eve of their wedding night, she told him that she could no longer have children. She told him that she still loved her husband George, and that would never change. She would agree to have an intimate relationship with him because she is now his wife, but she will not have love for Tom Jenkins. She still loves George. He wanted children and stopped right there. This came as a complete surprise to Mary because she is an attractive woman. After a month of marriage, he decided to move to the other side of the country for a better paying job. and since she could not give him children, he planned to divorce her. Mr. President Roberts could not believe that a man would reject such an attractive woman. He again asked Mary if she really did not have an intimate relationship with Tom Jenkins. She replied that the only man with whom she had intimate relations was George Harrison, her one and only true love, and she will always love him. Mr. Roberts invited me back into the office, and my Mary jumped up and ran to me, hugged me, and kissed me. George Harrison and Mary, I clearly know what I can do, but it will take some time. Mary, can you and the boys go live with your aunt? He asked. Everything is arranged. Here is her address, Mary said. Mr. Harrison, be clear. Do not move in with your wife. If you do, it will cost you, and the problem will take years to resolve. Go to your aunt and take the boys with you. Let me deal with this problem, he said. Mary's father took all the things to her aunt. Mary needed to pick up the boys and go there. I agreed to meet Mary every day. God, how I wanted my Mary. 2 days later, journalists started coming to my parents' house. They wanted history. I avoided them for a few days, and my father told me to sell my story to the highest bidder. It made sense, but before I did it, I went to Tom Jenkins' house to tell him my story. That night, I waited outside his house until I saw a car pull up. I waited a few minutes and knocked on the door. I was afraid it was Tom Jenkins who bullied me at school. The man opened the door, and it wasn't my nightmare, thank God. It wasn't him from my school days. Mr. Jenkins, can I talk to you about our problem? I told him. What problem can we have with you? I don't even know who you are, Tom Jenkins said. Mr. Dennis Jenkins, may I come in? We need to talk about Mary, I said. So you're the fool she ran off with. I have to break your neck now. Go away, Jenkins said. Mr. Jenkins, I am Mary's husband. She told you that I died in the war. Please let me explain, I said. With these words, he let me inside. I told him everything from the time I lost my memory until a week ago. I then told him that I was going to sell my story to the newspapers to the highest bidder. He understood the problem we both now faced. He then told me that he was going to divorce Mary because he wanted children, and unfortunately Mary could no longer have children. He also told me that I have 2 beautiful children. Then he stunned me. He said they never had an intimate relationship because he is a religious man. I was stunned. I wanted to jump for joy when I heard this. Then I wondered why my Mary didn't tell me. The next day I went to Mr. John Roberts' office. I told him what Mr. Tom Jenkins told me last night. I also told him that I was going to sell my story to the newspapers to the highest bidder. He told me that this would help us, and then advised me to demand compensation from the Army. I went to my parents' house and talked to my father about compensation from the Army. He thought about it. They made a mistake, and they have to pay. I went and talked to my Mary, telling her about the compensation from the Army. The next day, I had a meeting with all the main newspaper men. I sold my story and was going to demand compensation from the Army. The first thing my lawyer did was get Mary and Tom Jenkins a divorce. Everything was explained, and the divorce was granted. Mary told me that Tom Jenkins was a kind and good man, and boy, he really was. Now I could see my boys and live with the woman I loved so much. I received money for my story from the newspapers, and it was deposited in the bank. Compensation from the Army took another 6 long months, but they paid compensation with a public apology. The timing couldn't have been better. Quadruple the house we were planning to buy was back on the market. I didn't tell Mary that I used all the money I got from the newspapers and the compensation from the Army to buy a house. Our parents and a few friends had to help me move without Mary's knowledge. I even bought new furniture that was supposed to be delivered the same day. I took a week off, and my Mary went to work and the boys to school. Everything went according to plan. We finished the move long before Mary finished work. I picked up the boys from school and went to pick up Mary when she finished work. It was Friday evening. We started driving to the place where we used to live. I told my Mary to drive in the opposite direction, and I will tell her when to turn. We arrived at our first house. Mary, park in the driveway. I have a surprise for you, I said. The 4 of us got out of the car. I told the boys that the door was open. They went inside. I picked Mary up and carried her into our house. Our parents stood there shouting, "Welcome home." Mary burst into tears. The boys found their bedrooms and shouted to their mother how wonderful their rooms were. Mother Mary said, "Okay, you two, come and get into our car. You will stay with us for a few days. Mary, your dinner is almost ready in the kitchen." She whispered to me, "Don't show her the master bedroom until nightfall. There's a surprise for Mary," she winked. Mary's mother and father left with the boys. We sat down to dinner as we had done many years ago. After dinner, we walked through the house, and she was pleased with the new furniture. She was nervous. "Do you want to watch TV?" I asked Mary. "No, but what did Mom whisper to you?" Mary asked. "Let's go have a look," I said. I opened the door to the master bedroom and followed Mary. In an instant, she turned to me and burst into tears. Then I saw the reason. Everything was like after our 2-week honeymoon. Mary's mother put in Mary's wedding dress, veil, shoes, underwear, something borrowed, and something blue. On the bed and next to Mary's clothes was my 3-piece suit, shirt, tie, shoes, and socks. We looked at our new vanity. I was trying to find one like the one we had from her great-aunt. There were Mary's dried flowers and my boutonniere flower, a stack of wedding cards, telegrams, and all the table seat cards. And finally, the bride and groom figurines from our wedding cake with our names. And in the corner stood a dusty old suitcase. Well, I don't need to tell you what happened until late Sunday evening when the boys returned. The love nest has found love again that no one could wish for more. I had a lot of time to spend with the boys, and my Mary will always be with me. As for Tom Jenkins, he found his true love, and they had 4 children. We visit him from time to time. As for Mary and me, we have finally found Mr. Diesel Unknown. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one.